But the interesting thing is the power of hearing each other, right? And for me to hear Amber explain that it's enriching, right?
Yeah.
It brings a richness to the discussion of where's your commitment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's that key to hearing each other.
Welcome back to Breaking Bread, where we're continuing a conversation with Tim Funk and Amber Miller, myself, Matt Kaufmann, and we're discussing the generations, and delightfully our eyes are being opened to some of our blind spots and helping to understand one another. Well, let's talk a little bit about hearing each other, because hearing each other and then on top of that, trying to understand one another, I think we have to have a humility to hear another person for the true benefit that it might provide. Is there has to be a humility that says, I need to be informed. I need to be influenced. Going back to my wide tie analogy, I am being influenced, period. Always. I'm being influenced. I'm being influenced towards and away from things. Okay, now that I understand that I'm being influenced, I can't get out from underneath being influenced. Why not step into the influence? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That we would look and say, you know what, Tim, help me understand. I need that influence and that perspective, and vice versa. What are some of the qualities? What are some of the basic skills of being able to do this well?
So I think it is really important to be able to be a learner and to be able to be a listener in those situations, because especially as millennials, I see like a defensiveness that can start to pop up. And honestly, I think one of the reasons for that is because of all the stereotypes there are about millennials. And I feel like we are very put down in so many ways as irresponsible and self-centered and all these things. And so then you almost do see like a moody or a defensive reaction sometimes to that, which if you would take a step back and try to understand us, I think would make a lot of sense and help fill in some of those gaps. But if a person just sticks to the stereotypes and never steps back and thinks about the strengths of that other generation and that other age group, that's a real limitation.
Yeah. I like what you said there, Amber, about strength. So we'll just kind of share strengths between the generations. But one strength that I see in the millennial, I found them to be very open to instruction, very challenging, but they have allowed those voices in and have seen, for example, I think you would find in mentoring-mentee relationships, the millennials are pretty willing to sign up. I think it's a real admirable trait.
I think, too, as you look at the millennials, I'm amazed at their thinking process is no limits. And in my generation, we felt there were limits, right? There was, in some form.
Sure. And right, and there's pros and cons to that.
Exactly.
But what we're highlighting is the real value in coming to the table without limits.
Right.
You're going to get some ideas that are like, how did you ever come up with that?
They've been told they can do anything, right? And we as parents told them that. Yeah. And part of the reason is because the world has changed significantly, and we've seen that some of the boundaries that were there before for women and for girls, and some of the boundaries that were there in many different forms just in society have broken down due to diversity and some of those things where it starts to open up doors.
And they continue to push until they find improvement.
Right.
Okay, so let's just take an example. Growing up, Folgers cup was all you needed, and you bought a can.
Unbelievable.
And you used it for a month, and you went and bought another can. Tim, do you know that stuff was ground? I mean, we're talking months ago. Take coffee. This is a very simple thing. Coffee's been around for a long time. You make it in a pot, you drink it, and then all of a sudden, they're like wondering if that could be improved.
Yeah.
And you know what? They did.
Who thought you could charge $5 for a cup of coffee?
That's the brilliant part, right? I mean, you can be frustrated out to wazoo, but hey, they got a good gig going on, right?
Just
charge
added
$5
all sorts of things you never even knew you needed.
I know.
In a cup of coffee. All right, so now it's my turn to do some strength.
I don't know. See if you can say anything positive about us.
Oh, boy. Here goes.
Tim's sitting straighter.
I'm sitting to listen now.
So, a strength that has already been a little bit mentioned, but I'll just build off of, was the commitment level. And I think the steadiness is a characteristic of the baby boomers that I do appreciate, in the sense that they raised their families and they were very committed to their communities and tried to build up a world that was a better place.
Deny yourself.
Yes.
And we're talking about the generation before, too. Deep sacrifice. Deep sacrifice. And, something else to say, us Gen X, and I'm going to include the millennials, obviously, we haven't lived end of life.
Right.
For the most part. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so while freedom we might tout, we don't know what it's like yet to have to come back to a bedrock. Does that make sense? And I think that older generation has that bedrock. They have that foundation. And so I think our generations are yet to learn about the need for that and an anchor to go back to, right?
Well, and again, with the Gen X, that is a generation that is kind of the glue in some ways of being able to just do what needs to be done, I would say. And so as we're just talking here, I'm just struck by the way we need each other. And if you did just let the millennials keep going with their ideas and just keep going, that could be a dangerous thing. So you need the gravity that the baby boomers bring to the situation. Likewise, we have to keep moving forward, and we do need to keep making improvements in our world. And so, being able to listen to the millennials and not just write them off as crazy is really important.
Okay, then how about the blind spots? I think blind spots are healthy to think through, for us to kind of self-check and say, you know what, this is something I need to think about. So we'll play the activity differently this time. We'll let each one explain their own blind spots rather than us pointing them out. Who wants to go first?
Self-reflection.
Tim, blind spots of perhaps the...
I think some of the things for our generation, and I don't know if it's just our generation, when I say the baby boomers and maybe the early Gen Xers, but also the silent generation, is that we think we know the things that are tried and true, and it's hard for us to see change in those things that we believe are tried and true. And most of our life, things have proved to be tried and true.
I just want your reaction, both of you. When I say change, Tim, does that word have a negative connotation or a positive connotation?
It depends on what you're going to change.
I just said initial. I want initial reaction when I say change.
Caution.
Positive or negative? Caution. Amber?
Excitement.
Isn't that amazing? Just that one word. That one word says a lot. Okay, keep going.
I think as we look at just the ability to change and recognizing that there are things that do need to change, and that the younger generations are bringing them in, the millennials are bringing change, and some of these changes are good. The key is for us to be able to accept those changes, we have to be able to trust that the changes, that the people that are making those changes have the right goals in heart.
So change is a blind spot, right? As he mentioned, it's a caution. That's a cautionary word, right? What would you say, Amber? Blind spot of your generation?
Yeah, so I'll kind of lump the millennials and Gen Z together here a little bit and say that when it comes to change, we need to remember that we shouldn't just change for change's sake, and be careful not to throw out some of the tried and true methods just because we do want innovation and we do want change. And so I think that's an important thing to remember.
Can I make a comment on these two things, change and commitment? Because these two words actually go together, all right? Part of the reason why the older generation has caution around change is because they're committed. They're going to be committed to the change. Could it be that part of why we're eager for change is that we don't see commitment necessarily tied to it? And so we can play this out in a church setting, we can play this out in a work setting, we can play this out in lots of different areas. It's like, okay, we're going to make this change. Are you going to be with me next year? Or are we making this change for you, and then the rest of us are going to plow this ground because it's against my ideals to not be committed to this? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
We have these things knit into us, and we can see why it tees up problems.
I think one of the things, too, is that may be a blind spot, and it may be more subtle than it comes out, but it's the group versus the individual. And more of what is good for the group, what is good for the whole, what is good for the organization.
So when you're saying you're saying that older generation has a more of a larger.
And the millennial is many times thinks more individual, and it's just a different way of thinking about what is good for.
Yeah.
And
Amber, reaction to that? Do you agree with that?
I think it's true, and it is an interesting dynamic, because I would also say that our generation really pushes inclusivity and really pushes some of those features too. And so we do like really highly prize that diversity piece, or allowing people to be like the individuals that they want to be. Certainly the blind spot with that is that you can go off the rails with that real quickly if you don't have some boundaries in place and some biblical truth that is guiding that, and recognizing that, hey, there are some things that just aren't going to work.
Mm-hmm. So let me say, you just mentioned boundaries. Tim, you mentioned limits at the beginning of the podcast. Those kind of be the same thing, right?
Yeah.
So, which is really important, right? Yeah, so as I think about GenX's, right, blind spots, I don't know if this is like a self-admission. Like, I don't know if this is like coming from my experience or not. But sometimes I think GenX is we cannot maybe see the large picture of things. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And we might have our head down in the daily grind. And as much as that looks like due diligence and hard work, we can be apathetic. Mm-hmm. I think we can be apathetic in our parenting. I think we can be apathetic in our marriages, and apathetic in a larger vision. So there's my blind spot and confession.
So, as we're talking about blind spots here, one piece of advice that I would just offer would be to make sure when you look at your circles of friends and community that you do have representatives across the different generations. I think it's really important to just make sure that you are catching each other's blind spots and giving opportunity to learn from one another.
Which, Amber, there's really few places in our world that does that better than church does, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you think about your work setting, you're going to have some crossover generations in work setting, but you probably don't have the Generation Z there yet, right?
Yeah.
And you've probably retired off much of the silent generation, right?
Right.
And you think, we think about the school setting, we think about all these settings. Well, what setting in my life has got all... We've listed 5 generations or 6, whatever. I really can only think of one place, and that's church. Mm-hmm. Besides the community that I live in too, which is another place. But anyway, to your point.
It is so true that we can start to revolve around our peers and people that think like us, and they become our comfort zone. And what starts to develop really is more of a group think. And so it starts to reinforce some of the blind spots and some of the negative beliefs we maybe have about people from different age groups. And so again, to your point, Matt, of just being able to have a place to go, like a church that embraces the beauty of multi-generations, it's really a gift.
Well, and really what you're welcoming in, Amber, with all of that is influence. And that's a word that I dropped off early on. You are welcoming influence. Again, acknowledging that we are always being influenced. And it's important for us to know where we are being influenced and how we are being influenced. That group think really is solo influence. We're allowing one influence, right? There's a thought out there that the generational shifts are going to speed up. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned 15 to 20 years, but because of the exposure, our youngest generations have all kinds of impactful things happening because their life, they know it all around the world. We're not just talking about Central Illinois or we're talking about the entire world, right? So you can imagine the influences they have. Some might say they live lifetime. They live many generations quickly.
Yeah.
So to think we're going to kind of lay to rest this generational shift idea is not possible, right? We have to learn how to live with generational shift. What's the larger perspective that we need to take? And so let me lay the question to you here in closing. What perspective should we take? What is the main anchor, the main rudder to navigate generational shift, whether it be in our families, whether it be in our workplaces, or whether it be in the church?
I think there's one place where all these generations meet, One is that all people are God's children. God has created them all. Mm-hmm. He knows them all, inside and out. Each one has a living soul. And for all of us to recognize that if Christ is the center of this, Christ can bring these generations together. He gave us 2 great commandments. And I think if each generation holds to those great commandments and humbles ourselves in the sight of God, He will lift us up, and He will lift us up together.
In those 2 greatest commandments, to love God and to love our neighbor, right? And I think that wonderfully, points us all in the same direction. Tim, I appreciate that the number one greatest influence, and such a refreshing influence, is the Scriptures, the Word of God, Jesus Christ. His life, His example is, I think, so calibrating and so important as we navigate generational shifts. Thank you both. Amber, Tim, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for sharing. And thank you each one for listening in. We trust that this has probably been familiar to you. It's hit on concepts that you well experience in your life and relationships. We pray that this conversation orients you towards Christ and gives some perspective. Thanks for being along. Bye.